Hi, I'm Peggy Farron. Thanks for joining us on the Understand Photography Show, where we talk about travel, nature, and fine art photography. My guest today is Beth Ruggiero-York, and we're going to talk about night photography. The Understand Photography Show is a podcast, and we also put the behind-the-scenes videos on YouTube and on Facebook. We air at 4 p.m. Eastern Time every Friday. We have been doing this for a long time, 3.5 years. And our motto at Understand Photography is, we simplify the technical. So you will like our show. Stay tuned for some tips on night photography with Beth. But before you do, all of the show notes are on our website, understandphotography.com. So you'll see when you get to understandphotography.com, you'll see, I think that's a little link at the top, a tab that says the Understand Photography Show. We have a list of the different shows and guests and topics. And then Heather does a great job of summarizing the show, putting the links in and that kind of stuff. We really want this to be a teaching show. So if you have feedback or ideas for topics, let me know at info@understandphotography.com. Beth Ruggiero-York is a pretty amazing woman. She actually just finished a book, a memoir book, about her adventures as a pilot. It doesn't have anything to do with photography, but it just kind of goes to show you what type of person she is. She also has a couple of photography books, including a book, I have to look it up so I say it, Fun in the Dark. She's really, really good at night photography. So we are going to talk with Beth about taking pictures of the moon and about getting the Milky Way or the sharp stars, the night sky with the sharp pinpoint skies. So welcome, Beth.
Hi, Peggy. How are you today?
It's great. It's nice to see you across the world. Where are you?
I'm in Arizona.
Arizona.
Northeast of Phoenix, yeah. And we're getting our first cold weather, or for Phoenix, cold weather right now.
How cold is cold?
Cold is high 50s.
All right. That's my kind of cold.
Mine too.
Although yesterday when I went for my morning walk, it was 52 degrees. Today it was 63 degrees. So that's a big difference.
Big difference, but it's still very nice temperature.
Yeah. 63 was okay. 52 was cold.
Oh, you're a Florida gal.
I know. So we're going to talk about night photography. We're going to kind of go over a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. But first, I would like to hear, and I think our audience would like to hear about your inspiring story. The short version, of course.
Okay. Well, I came to photography within the last 15 years and really zeroed in on it. But before that, and after college, I wanted to fly. I became a pilot. So I have a new book out that I think this is what you're thinking of, you're referring to as the interesting story. And it's about the time that I was flying back in the 1980s. And I ultimately was hired by TWA, Trans World Airlines, which if you're too young, you won't know who they are, but they were kind of like another Pan Am. And I did that until I lost my medical. So I can't fly anymore because I lost my medical certificate because of health issues. So that was what I did then. And then I went on to study, get my master's in Chinese. My bachelor's was in Chinese studies. And my two careers right now are photography and Chinese translation, which I've been doing for over 20 years now.
Wow.
I like to keep it interesting. I like to keep it really interesting.
And you write books.
Well, yeah, that book was something I'd wanted to do ever since I stopped flying.
Wow. So when did that come out? What month and year?
It came out a month ago.
So that would be October 2019?
October 14th, 2019. And the name of it is Flying Alone.
All right. By Beth Ruggiero-York.
Yes.
So you can look up in Amazon, I assume?
Yes. Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all the others.
Or even just go to your website. I'm sure you can find
Or
it.
go to my website. That's right.
That's awesome. Wow, that's amazing. So you took up photography as just a hobby and then decided to go professional, or?
Photography. I was divorced at the time, and I was dating a guy who was really into photography. And I realized very early on that if I didn't start taking up on photography, this relationship was going nowhere. In the end, it did go nowhere. But for 2 years, we photographed nonstop. Every weekend, both days out shooting. And he was very technical, so he really imparted a lot of his knowledge. And it was like intensive photography training for a 2-year period. So in a way, I was very fortunate to have that, really.
Yeah, I mean, that's for me, I want to do all these cool things. You know, I've had this podcast for quite some time now, and I've been learning a lot. And, you know, we do tours and all this other stuff. You learn from other people.
Right.
But I don't have time to get out there.
Well, that's where I am at this point. When I'm teaching a workshop, I'm out there. Occasionally I'll get out there. I have a meetup group like you do. Mine is for night photography though. And, but you know, it's hard. Life gets very busy, especially when you start doing things like podcasts, right?
I know. I never dreamed it would be. I did know it was going to be hard, and I really didn't want to do it, but I'm glad I did. Although I've had my reflection moments where, is this worth it?
I hear you. I have that with like my meetup group, and but then I think of all the great people I've met and all the great people I get to be with when we have meetups, and it continues, and it will continue.
So let's start with moon photography. Now, it's pretty much impossible to take a cell phone picture of the moon, right?
You can, and of course the phones are getting much better. The cameras in the phones are getting much better. In fact, Google just released their Pixel 4, which has a night scene mode. But that being said, you could take a picture of the moon. You just have to, because you have to expose for just the moon. Say it's at 45 degrees elevation, okay? So you point your phone at the moon and you tap the moon so that the camera is not focusing, but exposing just for the moon. And then shoot, and you'll get the moon. I mean, it won't be the greatest high resolution image, and it's because it's handheld, it probably will be a little fuzzy, you know. But so you really, to do it right, you need to use a camera on a tripod. Okay, so walk us through photographing the moon. Well, it depends if we're talking about photographing the full moon, and that's what I'm going to talk about, I think, at the first. Okay. There's only one time every month for about 20 minutes when you have the only time when you can get a correctly exposed image of the moon and the foreground in a single shot. And that is, you have to look at when the full moon is rising or setting, at that point in the month, full moon, and you have to see when the rise of the moon is closest to sunset, or when the setting of the moon in the morning is closest to sunrise. And it's that moment, those 20 minutes after the moon breaks the horizon or is coming towards the horizon, that you have to get that correct exposure, single correct exposure. Otherwise, you need to composite. Wow, I just learned something. I never knew that. And if you want to shoot just the moon at other times of the month, or even after those 20 minutes that I just described, or before those 20 minutes in the morning, then you need to do either a composite, or you're just going to expose simply for the moon. Okay, so you'll get a nice shot of the moon, and everything else will go black. All right, so walk us through it. That type of shot, you mean? Yeah, yes. Or the full moon shot, no, full moon rising shot. Which one do you want to start with? I'll start with the full moon rising, because that's the best. Yeah, that sounds like more fun. It's fun. So you need to know your where you're going. You need to know have scouted your site, and it has to be a good site for the moon. And photo pills and photo ephemeris are great apps for that.
Okay.
Especially, I use photo pills a lot. So you want to find a location that has a nice foreground, but you also want that location to be, if there's mountains in the distance, you have to remember that if it tells you that the moon is rising at 5:30 p.m., well, chances are it's not going to be till 6 p.m.
Oh, because it has to get over the
It
mountains.
has to come up over the mountains. So that can complicate moonshots. So the best thing, and especially if you're in Florida, the ideal situation is when the horizon is at or close to sea level. And when it says that the moon is going to be rising, the moon is in fact going to show itself on the horizon because there's nothing in the way. So you get to that location and you set up before, an hour before, because you need to be ready and get your settings all in place. This is one of the times when you can use auto white balance.
Okay.
At night, I don't recommend using auto white balance, but we can talk about that more. And your settings are going to be, it's going to be less than a second, but because I don't know what the ambient light is, I can't give you an exact exposure setting.
Okay.
But it's going to be less than a second, but not a whole lot less than a second. And your ISO, keep it at the base ISO. So whatever your camera system is, if it's Canon, it's 100, Nikon, most of them are 100 now, and so on. Sony's 200.
Okay.
And shoot it at that. And then you'll see that when you see the moon coming up, then you start shooting. I recommend.
What's your f-stop?
Oh, I'm sorry. Your f-stop can be smaller than for night photography, and that is you could use an f8 or a 5.6 aperture.
Okay.
Okay. Because there's still enough light coming in that you can stop it down. At night, however, I talk about stopping down. It's because at night you want either your widest aperture or very close to your widest aperture because you need light. So anyway, that's the only other thing I would say about that type of the full moon rising or setting is that if there's, say you want it rising and you have a building or a tree or something that's your focus besides the moon, your subject besides the moon, make sure that subject is as far away from you as possible, because the moon will appear very small if it's close to you. So if the building is close to you and full moon is rising back there, it's going to look really tiny.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so you try to get that foreground at a distance.
Okay, that's good advice. Plus, it'll go a little blurry, won't it, if you're focusing on the moon?
Well, 5.68, you'll be fine. You're not focusing on the moon. You're focusing for infinity.
Okay.
And a building, and I say close to you, I don't mean 10 feet. It could be, say, 100 feet.
Okay.
And then you're at infinity. And, then you're getting into things like hyperfocal distance. And I'm not going to spend the time here unless you want me to talk about hyperfocal.
Well, basically, how far away when you say not close do you mean?
Like 100 feet
okay.
Or 200 feet, but not, don't make something that's a mile away or a half mile away or 500 feet away be the subject.
Yeah,
the other
okay.
subject is the moon.
Okay. So you're focusing you're putting your lens on infinity to focus.
Well, that's all getting into the focusing and focusing at night.
Okay.
When you are shooting the moon rising, okay, when you start shooting, it's still light enough to use autofocus.
Okay.
You're not manually focusing yet in this situation. So what you will do is you will focus using autofocus and on infinity. And when I say on infinity, something distant. And it could be very much be that subject, that building, for example, that you want in your to be your subject. And what I do is I take a picture of this building, and then I with autofocus, I zoom in and I check the exposure. All right, well, the building is in focus, but are those distant mountains or whatever's off in the distance, way distance, are those in focus too? And if they are, you have infinity focus.
So you just zoom in and look at the picture after you took it to see?
Yeah.
Okay. And for those, I just realized that some of our audience might not know what infinity focus is. So why don't you explain that?
Sure. Infinity focus is the point at which the furthest objects are in focus. In other words, the stars. And then you get infinity focus using the hyperfocal distance. And I don't want to confuse anybody, but I'll start by saying on an autofocus lens, if you look at your lens barrel, the focus ring, you can turn it to infinity. So there's a little infinity symbol on your lens. On an autofocus lens, though, infinity is not infinity. Because of the autofocus motor, it needs a buffer, and so infinity is not going to be quite at that spot. And so don't think that if you turn it to that, it's going to be at infinity. Infinity meaning the stars are sharp or the moon is sharp. Okay. The way you do it is autofocusing in daylight, switching to manual focus, okay, so that it doesn't try to refocus. Or in the case of the moon, you can leave it on autofocus because you can still, with each shot, you can autofocus again. It's still light enough.
Now, when you're photographing the moon, that's a big light. So wouldn't you be able to focus on the moon?
That's what I mean. You can.
Oh,
focus.
that's what you mean. Oh, okay.
But what you have to do is check that initial shot to make sure that your building or tree or whatever is also in focus.
Okay.
And that's where hyperfocal distance comes in, and there's charts you can use to calculate that for your. It gets complicated. So what I tell people, exactly, what I tell people in my classes is take a test shot, make sure everything you want to be in focus is in focus. It's just that simple.
I like it when people simplify things.
You have to. It can get too complex, you know.
That's for sure. Okay. All right. So let me so we're at ISO 100 in most cases.
Right.
F 5.6 to 8. Now, see, I've always learned Looney 11 rule. I always heard F11.
Yeah, and that's a lot of people ask me about that, and it's valid, but it really pertains to, it's like the Sunny
16.
16.
Sunny 16, yeah.
It applied to film situations.
Ah.
So it's a little outdated.
Okay.
So in the interest of a little bit more depth of field, F8, F5.6 or F8, and it depends on, and the focal length of your lens will also affect that, the depth of field. So F8, it depends. If you want the moon to look really big, you need to use a longer lens. And in those cases, I recommend a 70 to 200.
Okay.
But if you don't mind if the moon is less prominent, you can use a wider lens. I would not use an ultra wide because it's just going to be a little dot then on the.
Yeah. So what's the minimum length lens in your opinion?
I wouldn't shoot with less than, say, 100 millimeters.
Okay. But 200 would be better, you think, if you want a big moon?
If you want the moon to be bigger, yeah. Okay. Now, depending on how far, again, if your other subject, that building, that hypothetical building is far away, then the longer the lens, the better, because it will magnify the moon, obviously, but you can still get that building in, because it's far enough away. And I've shot it at 600 millimeters. I've shot it at 200 millimeters. I've shot it at 100, and it's just a different effect, and you have to see what pleases you.
Now, when you're doing the exposure for both the building and the moon, you only have that 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So are you metering on the moon, or are you metering on the building, or how are you getting to know what your shutter speed should be?
At that point, in that little tiny period of time, I'm using matrix metering, or whatever, evaluative, I think is
Canon's word, yeah.
But the all over, because it's very advanced now. And you still have, that 20 minutes is when you have enough time, or enough light, excuse me, that it can meter the whole scene.
Okay. All right. So then if you're shooting in manual, you're going to get to 0. Okay.
However, beyond the 20 minutes, when it's getting higher in the sky and the
landscape gets dark.
When things are, the difference between bright and light is too wide, well, then you're going to have to expose for the moon or expose for the foreground, one or the other, but one is not going to be correctly exposed.
All right, so let's move on to just exposing for the moon. What do you do differently? You're still on a tripod. You're still on ISO 100.
On a tripod for all of this, but you're still on a tripod. But if you're just shooting the moon, it's now, say, an hour after the full moon has just risen, and you just want a shot of the moon. There's a couple things you can do. First of all, you can just focus on the moon, meter for the moon, and shoot, and that's going to give you your exposure.
Now, in that case, wouldn't you be on spot metering?
You can use spot metering, but if newer cameras are having the ability to tie your spot metering, tie your focus point to your metering point, connect those so that you focus on the moon, which is bright enough to focus on, and the meter is going to take the reading from that focus point. And therefore, you are exposing for the moon. It's not hard at all. It's not hard at all. And you can use autofocus. So you point at the moon, use autofocus, it focuses on the moon, and that's it. It focuses on the moon, takes the readings, and click, you're good to go.
So you're staying, all the other settings are the same, f5.6 to f8?
Yes, you can do that because you are metering for the moon. The ISO eventually is going to have to start coming up. Okay. Otherwise, if you don't start bringing it up, the darker it gets, obviously, you need to increase the ISO. And the reason is that if you stay with the 100 ISO, your shutter speed is just going to get slower and slower. And that's okay, except there is apparent, just like the stars appear to move with longer exposures, well, the moon also does. And you're not going to get the crispest shot.
That was a hard word.
of that moon. Yeah.
All right, hold on though, because the moon is really bright all night long, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to me you would have a pretty fast shutter speed if you were just taking a picture of the moon.
You will.
Nothing else.
True, you will. So you're exposing for the moon. So whatever those exposure settings are, you just need to keep an eye on your shutter speed. So just to make sure it's not getting too long, so that there might be a little blurring of the moon.
Okay.
I'm not saying you're going to 6400 by any means. I'm talking, 200 or 400 ISO, that kind of thing.
Oh, okay. Okay. So, all right. So the difference between taking a picture of just the moon, which you can do pretty much any time of the night.
Yeah.
Or doing that 20 minutes where you want the landscape to come out as well as the moon. It's still going to be dark though, right? The foreground?
It's going to be a sunset foreground.
Okay, so it could be.
It won't be daylight, but it will be.
Like it'll be like a silhouette though if the moon is behind the building. Let's keep using that building as an example. The building is going to be a silhouette, right?
No, not in that 20 minutes.
Okay, interesting.
That's why you want that 20 minutes, because that's the period when you can do in one shot correct exposure, both foreground and background.
Okay, that's cool. So the biggest difference between just taking a picture of the moon and taking a picture of the moon with the foreground, as far as your settings go, is basically you're just spot metering, and your shutter speed will be much faster when you're just doing the moon. Is that right? Okay. So your shutter speed will be a little slower to get the ambient light from the landscape when you want the landscape to show up, but then you're going to be taking the picture of the bright ball of the moon alone. You don't care if the rest, you want the rest of it to go dark.
The rest of it's going to go black, and that's what you theoretically want. And the detail of the moon will be there. It won't just be a white blob. It will be, the craters will show and all of that.
Now, everybody wants to take pictures of the full moon. Is that better?
Well, it's what I would call an event, a lunar event, and it's a beautiful time to shoot it. When the moon is low on the horizon, when it's rising or setting, it can look so large sometimes. But it depends on what your goals are. You have to envision your shot, and do you want that big orangey moon at the horizon, which is what you do when full moon rising or full moon setting, or do you just want the moon itself? Or the other option is that you can composite, as I had said, and take a shot that exposes for the moon, exposes for the foreground, and then blend them afterwards in Photoshop or whatever you use.
Do you use layer masks? Is that how you do it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's one thing we learned on the podcast. So it's too hard to explain editing techniques without any visuals.
It's not an easy, I don't think you can do it successfully.
Now, are there any like weather patterns that are better for the moon or worse for the moon for photographs?
If there's particles in the air, if there's a lot of particulate matter, so there's haze or even smoke. Where I am, Arizona, the wildfires go on and you get smoke. That actually makes for a more brightly colored moon. Or pollution. I hate to say it, but a polluted, what smog does to a sunrise and a sunset. Well, it does the same to the moon.
So it gives a little more of an orangey glow, and it's a softer diffuse. And I know for me, I like when I see those pictures of the moon with like clouds around them. That looks so cool.
I agree. And I always tell people don't not shoot at night or not shoot the moon, because there are some clouds, obviously if it's totally overcast, or if it's mostly cloudy or even 50% cloudy, chances are it's not going to work out. But partly cloudy, it adds a lot of interest.
Yeah, I love those pictures. All right, so I'm going to move on. We killed the moon. The moon, we talked about the moon to death. Actually, this is still a moon question, because this is actually a question that Heather wrote down that I'd never even thought about. Is it possible to get both the moon and the stars in the same image without compositing?
That's a great question. There is one time when you actually can get a dark sky with stars and a full moon, and that is during a full lunar eclipse. You've seen a lunar eclipse, correct? I assume.
Can you see the moon when you see it? I'm trying to visualize a lunar eclipse right now. I can't think of it.
It's spectacular. I love the lunar eclipse. The first one I ever shot, in fact, was in Naples.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. That's awesome. So basically you just get like a rim light around the moon? Is that what happens? No. Okay, explain it to me then, because I don't know.
It is completely at the point of full eclipse. It's completely orange. It looks like the color of a penny.
Ah.
Detail, it's gorgeous. But because it's dark, it's not bright white, it won't blow out. But if you at that moment of full eclipse, or those minutes of the full eclipse, but because it's so dark, you get the stars. And I have images of
Wow.
just the moon in full eclipse with stars all around it, and it's just magnificent. So that's the one time you can get that.
Ah, that's cool. I never even thought about that. That's a great, when's the next eclipse? Do we know?
I think it's not till 21. I need to look it up, but I don't think there's any. Well, I don't know about Florida, but for my part of the country in Arizona, the southwestern part of the country, it's going to be, I think, another year.
We have very bad luck because they always have the eclipses always happen in our rainy season.
Oh,
So it's always super cloudy. So we always miss it. All right, so let's talk about just general night photography. Let's say I want to, everybody wants to take a picture of the Milky Way, right?
yep.
So, you find some kind of foreground
hmm
and you kind of go through some of the same steps you did for the moon, right?
You do. In the Milky Way, I'll go through the steps, but keep in mind that shooting the Milky Way is no different than just shooting a very starry sky or a starry sky period. It's going to be when it's a dark sky, so no moonlight. Otherwise, the Milky Way gets washed out. But yeah, you need. So when I talk about the Milky Way, it's basic night shooting.
Okay.
Stars as points, not star trails.
Okay.
So first things first, and this is a basic for night photography, is you need to scout your site during the day. Don't show up someplace that you've never been to in the dark and expect to have a successful shoot. It's just not wise. So scout your location, what you want for your foreground and all of that. And then show up at your site before dark. Well, I say before dark, but that's in the spring when we first get to see the Milky Way. And when I talk about the Milky Way, I'm talking about the core, the galactic center, that dense part with all the color. So in March and April, when the northern hemisphere starts getting it back again, it's now in the southern hemisphere, you're talking about the pre-dawn hours.
Okay.
So it means going out at 3 in the morning or 4 in the morning.
All right.
And so obviously you can't you could get there before dark, but you'd be sitting there for a really long time. But if you can go before dark, that's great. If you can't, make sure you scouted it during the day. Go to your site, establish your composition, put set your camera in the place you want it to be, and then you need to establish focus. Okay, and focus at night is the biggest challenge for any night photographer.
It sure was for me.
It is, and don't feel like you're the only one. It's something that you practice, you learn, and it becomes much easier, and you don't even think about it.
All right, so give me some tips for the night. I've only done it, I don't know if 2 or 3 times I've only tried it, and the focusing was the frustrating part for me. It was really, really hard to focus.
Well, I usually outline 4 methods of focusing at night. The first one is in the daytime, get there early, or pre-focus, do a pre-focus for infinity, okay, which is going to be something that's 200 feet away or more for infinity, with the settings and the focal length that you'll be using for your shoot. So you pre-focus, then you switch it to manual focus. Pre-focus using auto, switch it to manual focus. Okay. Now, unless you are back button focus, so I'm not going to even talk about back button focus. I'm talking about when you press the shutter release halfway, and it tries to focus. When you switch it to manual, it will no longer try to do that. But the other thing you do to stabilize it is you put a piece of tape on the lens. And the tape goes between the focus ring and the fixed part of the lens barrel.
Okay.
And so if you brush against it, you
won't knock it out of place.
stabilizes it. And the tape I'm talking about is called gaffer tape.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
boy, am I ever.
Okay, all right. So
maybe my audience isn't.
Right, for those who aren't, it's essentially duct tape, except it doesn't leave a residue, and that's why you want to use gaffer tape, because you don't want
to leave it on too long.
What's it?
I said unless you leave it on too long, like I'm talking too long, like a year.
Like a year, right? But
then it does leave a residue. Learned that the hard way.
Actually, yeah, you're right. If it's on a lens, yeah. I have some that's taped around my tripod leg. It's probably been there for years, because just in case I forget, I have it there on my tripod leg. And if I take that off, I bet you're right, there would be a residue. But in general, you're taping it just for the night, or and you're going to be fine.
And it's expensive.
Really? I haven't had to buy any in a while. What are you finding?
For it's a pretty big roll that I buy, but it's like $30. That's a lot of money for tape.
That is. Are you getting from the hardware store?
I'm getting thick though, because the main thing I use gaffer's tape for is, I'm a working photographer doing events and portraits and things like that so I use it to tape down the cords for my lights.
Yeah.
So I need it to be, 4 inches thick. So it's expensive. And you go through a lot of it when you do that. So
doing that, absolutely. For the purposes I'm talking about, get the narrower one, and you can get it on Amazon, and you can get it in some of the local camera stores, but small rolls, about an inch wide, maybe 3/4 of an inch, and that will be what serves you best. And no, you don't have to pay $30 for it.
Okay, so that's one technique now when you say pre-focus, how do you pre-focus if it's night?
Well, that was in a daytime situation.
If you had time to go there during the day and set everything up, but you can't leave your stuff there all day. But you tape the lens.
Right. I mean, say you're doing
and you mark where your tripod was, I guess.
I'm sorry?
So if you pre-focus during the day and then you have to wait 12 hours, 6 hours, I'm good at math here. You're not going to sit there the whole time. So you're going to have to pack
when I say during the day, I mean while it's light enough. So you get there at sunset, it's still light enough to do that. Assuming you're going to just shoot right through sunset into the blue hour and then into dark skies.
Okay, so what's the second option?
The second option, well, it's not before dark, it's after dark. And now, assuming we're talking about the Milky Way, if you want to use autofocus and then go through the same routine I just described for before dark, use autofocus on a distant light, or if there is a part of the moon out, theoretically we're talking about dark sky shooting, so you're not going to have a moon. If there's a quarter moon, then you can definitely get autofocus on it. But let's assume it's just a distant street light or a building light or something like that, but it has to be far enough away and bright enough. Okay, and then you do the same thing I just described. You use autofocus, then you switch to manual focus, then you tape down your focus ring.
Okay.
Gaffer tape, and that's the second method.
Okay. Now
it's dark. There's no distant light. Okay, what are we going to do? We're going to do one of two things. Method 3 is you're going to find the brightest star or planet in the sky. And I don't care if it's behind you, just find the brightest planet or star that's up there. You're going to find it, put it in the middle of your viewfinder. You're going to be in manual focus.
Okay.
You're not going to be able to autofocus on it. And then you're going to turn live view on. And you're going to magnify it so it's still in the center of your your image, what you're looking at on the back of the camera in the viewfinder, and zoom in about 10x. And as you zoom in about 10x, then it'll be enough so that you can manually focus on it. And you just turn that focus ring until it's sharp. People, and I always go back and forth, really tweaking it. If the star is round and globular looking, it is not in focus. But when the star is, or the planet is the smallest it can be, and it's very sharp and almost crunchy looking, that's in focus. Okay, so when you get there, you know, all right, now I have it. You're already in manual focus. Tape down your focus ring again, or for the first time, whatever, and then you're good to go. Okay.
Okay, let me just walk through that again, because so you're going to point at something, a star somewhere, and it doesn't matter if it's behind you, because it's the issue of distance, right? So you're going to focus, you're going to not zoom in with your lens. You're going to go on live view and just zoom in on looking at it, not zooming with your lens.
Not your lens.
I just want to make that really super clear. Okay, and then you focus, tape it, leave it manual focus, tape it down, and then you can move your tripod around, and you should be at
move your tripod around anywhere you want at that point, because you have infinity focus. But the only thing you have to keep in mind if you move around is that if there's a tree or a bush or something, when you turn 90 degrees that way, and now there's a tree there, make sure that the tree is also in focus. And the way I do that is just to a test shot. Zoom in, your stars theoretically are still sharp, obviously, because you taped it down, but check that tree. And if the tree is not in focus, then you either have two choices. You can stop down and stay where you are and stop it down. And now that's great, but it's not always an option at night because it's so dark. So if you stop down, it may.
And when you say stop down, you mean have a smaller aperture, like go from f5.6 to.
So if you're at 2.8, you might go to f4 and then see if that's enough. Or a better option is to move back if it's physically possible. Make sure there's no cliffs behind you, or just change your composition.
Yeah, that was the first time we went. My friend Chris, he scoped out this cool place in the Everglades called Oil Well Park, I think. And there's an oil derrick. Yeah. You know it? Okay. And we just couldn't get back far enough. So it was either something was blurry, we just couldn't get back far enough, unless we went into the pasture with the bulls and trespassed, but we didn't want to do that in the middle of the night in Everglades. So second time.
That is a dilemma. And for that, it's a situation where you can do focus stacking. If I don't know if you've ever done any podcasts on focus stacking, but that's when you take a shot focused at a certain distance and then a little further distance and so on, so that everything from near to far is in focus. Okay, at the end you have to merge them, and you have to have the software, or you can do it in Photoshop to merge them, or just change your composition. And there's something that you really have your heart set on being in that foreground. That can be frustrating, but.
Well, the other thing that none of us paid attention to was there were telephone wires that were, I never could figure out how to get them out of the picture. When I finally got a decent picture of the telephone wires, because the stars are so tiny. And I know when another photographer tried to show me how to do it, but it didn't look right. So anyway, so watch out for telephone wires if you're out there too. Our second location that same night, we went over to, I don't remember what the area is called, but it was, nothing was close. There was water, and then, the tree was far, far away. However, there was a red light from a radio tower or something like that, and that was really overexposed. So
Oh, it was overexposed? Okay.
the red light was. So
Mhm.
it was a little distracting in the picture, I thought, because
Right.
that's where your eye went instead of up at the, you
Stars.
know.
Yeah.
All right. So what was that was 3, right?
That was 3. Number 4 is using a laser pointer.
Okay.
It has to be a strong enough laser pointer that you aim at something that is, it has to be a surface, like a rock, or even the ground, depending on how you're standing, above or below. But shine that laser pointer on something that is, say, 50 feet away, far enough away to you'll be getting infinity focus. So say there's a rock out there, or say there's a hill or a tree trunk or whatever, shine it on that, and then use autofocus and focus on that pinpoint of light that's on the rock. And actually your camera will pick it right up and autofocus on it.
Wow.
Manual and tape it down.
Where do you get a laser pointer that strong?
Oh, you can get them on Amazon.
How do you know it's strong?
It's basically a decent quality one. I don't know the numbers, and I apologize for that, but don't get the $5 one.
Those are the kind I have.
See, you go into the description and see what they're used for, if it's a tactical one, if it's a whatever it's used for.
Okay. Okay, that's good
And it doesn't have to be
advice.
green, it can be a red one too, or whatever you want. But it's very, very effective and very easy.
So for my second location and across the little pond, what was big pond? I don't think it's a lake. It's man-made wherever we were, but the trees were probably 200 yards away. Could I use the laser pointer that far away and focus that way?
If it's a strong one, yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. Oh, I'm going to get one of those because I want to do it again this spring. And I was frustrated. And then we were in New England a couple summers ago, and I was frustrated, and nobody seemed to be having trouble but me. But we had the lighthouses, but we weren't that far away from them. So maybe they were focus stacking, or maybe they were, compositing. I don't know, but everybody else got good shots but me.
Actually, the lighthouses are usually, because I'm from New England, a lot of them are far enough away, and it may only be 70 feet or 100 feet maybe, that you're okay with. That will be in focus.
Okay.
And you just, like I said, always do a test shot, see if it's in focus. Stop it down if you can. Stop the aperture down to a smaller aperture, aka larger f number, and you'll be fine. So anyway, yeah, it's get a laser pointer. A couple caveats on that. First of all, never shine the laser pointer in someone else's eyes. I know you wouldn't do it intentionally, but don't do it accidentally, because it will fry your retina if it's directly pointed at your eye. It will also do that to the sensor of a camera, so that if you accidentally point it into a lens, whether it's yours or somebody else's, it will fry that sensor if it goes right through the aperture. So that's something to be careful about.
Oh,
and of
yeah.
course, the other one is, don't shine it in the sky. If you see any aircraft around, if there's a chance that aircraft will be around, just don't take the chance. A lot of people like to use it for pointing out constellations, and that's fine, but make sure there's no air traffic.
Ah, that's good advice too.
When it goes into a pilot's vision, you've heard stories probably on the news where they temporarily lose their vision, and it's a problem.
Yeah. Okay. So what are so now I've composed and I've focused.
Right.
What are my settings?
Well, it depends on the ambient light. It's so hard to give people oh, this is what your settings are going to be. But for, let's say, for the Milky Way on a dark night, okay, and this would also just go for a starry sky, excuse me, on a dark night. Good idea.
I know, it's thirsty business talking, isn't it?
It is, especially out here in Arizona where the air is so dry. It's a night shoot. I'll give you starting settings. So everybody could try 20 seconds at ISO 3200 and your widest aperture. Okay. Now, when I say your widest, I'm thinking that you're going to have an f2.8 lens. Okay. If you have a lens that has a maximum aperture of f4, which isn't as wide as 2.8, then that's a stop difference, and you're going to need to go from 3200 ISO to 6400 ISO to compensate.
And then you might get noise depending on your camera.
Depending on your camera, yeah, exactly. And that's why for night photography, it's so, if you're really interested in it, it's so important to have a lens that is at least 2.8. In the darkest situations, you really ideally want 2.0 f2, which is another stop brighter than 2.8, or 1.4, which is yet another stop brighter. So those are equipment concerns for nighttime photography.
And does it make a difference if you're on a full frame camera or a crop frame?
As far as
just like if let's say you're gonna dedicate your life to night photography like you have. Would you buy a crop or a full, or does it matter?
I am now shooting Olympus. I switched from full frame Sony to Olympus, okay. And I did a lot of research, and I'm loving it. That's obviously a crop sensor camera, and it's working beautifully. The technology is going forward so much. I would say that you can do a fine job with crop. Full frame would be ideal in some cases, but if you're not shooting full frame, which you don't have to be, and I say crop sensor, Olympus is really new advanced technology. So I'm not talking about the Nikon D3100. You're going to have a hard time with ISO on that camera. It's just the way it is. So I'm not going to say you need one or the other, but you do need a camera that has good not high, but higher ISO capabilities. So ideally, you can go to 3200 at least, and preferably 64.
Without noise.
Without
much noise.
Without much noise. And the whole deciding factor that I always tell people is that there's going to be noise. That's a given. But can you correct it in post-processing? Okay. And when it's correctable, then you're good. It's
acceptable. All right. So you said 20 seconds is what you said and why? How do you determine that?
I'm going to give you a rule, and it's pretty easy. 400 divided by your effective focal length. I'll explain that in a second. 400 divided by, say you're shooting a 20 millimeter lens on a full frame camera. 400 divided by 20 equals 20 seconds. That is the approximate number of seconds you can use for starting exposure without getting star trailing. Because that's the key. When the longer your exposure, the longer the Earth is moving and the stars will trail. So that's the key, is to make sure that your focal length is short enough, wide enough that you're going to get enough seconds. Because the longer the focal length, say you're shooting with a 200 lens, you've got all of 1 second. And at night, in the real dark, it's a tough one, okay?
And then you don't have enough light.
You don't have enough light, right. So it's 400 divided by your effective focal length. And when I say effective, that's for a full frame camera, your effective focal length is 20 millimeters if it's a 20 millimeter lens. But for a crop sensor camera, say it's a Nikon, and the crop factor is 1.5, so that 20 millimeter lens is actually 30 millimeters. That's the effective focal length, because it's taking into the crop factor into account. And so it's 400 divided by 30 in that case.
Okay. A lot of math.
So you get shorter. There is math, yeah. Unfortunately, there is some technicality to night, technical stuff at night, but the rewards are worth it. So worth it.
I agree. I love it. I love it. I just haven't really been very successful, so I'm going to try again this year. You know, it's too bad because right now it gets dark so early, but you know, and you've lived here for a little while, right? Or you had a home here in Naples, so you know it's
there for a little while. Yeah.
All we do is work in season because we only have 6 months to make money, you know. So it's like I don't get to go out and do photography unless I'm teaching, but then I'm usually not taking any pictures, you know. So how much post-processing do you do on your pictures?
I will say this. There is not a night photograph out there that can be used straight out of camera, theoretically. I mean, it really is, you need to do post-processing, at least some. And one of those is to correct the white balance. Even though you may have been shooting in an acceptable white balance in camera, I haven't found a night shot that I haven't had to or wanted to tweak that white balance. That's a big one. So if nothing else, you're doing noise reduction and white balance correction. Okay. But ideally you're doing more than that.
Yeah. Do you use like more contrast or something to make the
contrast? Yeah. Whether it's depending on the program you're using, but contrast, however you apply contrast is a big one. Sharpening. And also, you know, on those dark nights, if you have a lot of shadows in the foreground, you have to work with those. But to try to bring some detail, the problem is in dark areas, when you open them up in shadows, what you get is a lot of color noise. And color noise is difficult to get. Well, it's not impossible, but it's very hard to get rid of, and to get really a good quality shot in post-processing.
Okay.
A lot of factors involved.
I'm sorry, I interrupted.
There's a lot of factors involved.
Okay.
You know.
All right. But you do some minimum no matter what in processing. All right. So what are some final tips on well, we talked about moon photography, Milky Way, and basically Milky Way is the same as getting those pinpoint sharp star skies. Final tips. Final tips
are, first of all, always use your histogram at night. Always, because that's the one thing that's going to get you the true picture of your exposure. Okay. Looking at the back of the camera is not going to be very reliable. Also, the light meters the light meter in your camera, don't rely on it to tell you whether you're underexposed or overexposed. It has no value at night. So you need to, one thing you do need to do that's really important, and this is the final tip, turn the brightness of your LCD monitor on the back of your camera way down to the lowest value it'll go. Otherwise, you're going to think you have these beautiful bright pictures when, in fact, they are underexposed and you're getting a false image in the back of the camera.
Oh, that is a good tip. Now, you have a whole book on night photography?
I do, and it's called Fun in the Dark, a guide to
Fun in the Dark. It sounds kind of dirty.
A guide to successful night photography, and it will take you through the things that we talked about, but a whole lot more. And it goes at the end goes into some of the post processing to get you started with that. But that can be found on Amazon, or you can go to my website, funinthedark.net will get you there. And that's on my website, my photography website, and you can order it through there.
Now, what other books do you have?
Well, I co-wrote with Robert Chaplin, Everglades National Park, a photographic destination, and that's a great book. It also can be purchased on Amazon.
Yeah, I bought it when he was my guest on the show, and I'm not sure Heather can put in the show notes what episode he was on, but he was a good guest.
Oh, he's a great teacher. He really is. I've known him for years, and he's a fantastic photographer. So that book and the Fun in the Dark, I will be doing a new edition of Fun in the Dark in the next year probably, to update it. It's about 5 years old now, but still all very applicable. And then, of course, my new book, Flying Alone, which has nothing to do with photography at all. So those are my 3 books out there right now.
That's so awesome. Good for you. I mean, that's a big accomplishment to write even one book, you know?
I always wanted to do it, but yeah, it's very satisfying, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah. Now, where can our audience find you?
You can find me at www.bethruggiero-york.com, or alternatively, bethruggiero.com. bethruggiero.com is my photography website. bethruggiero-york.com is my author website. But through the author website, there's a link for photography that'll take you back to bethruggiero.com. And that's where you can find me.
And it's Ruggiero.
Beth Ruggiero-York. I don't know if you can see that. Ruggiero York, Y-O-R-K.
Well, thank you for being on the Understand Photography Show.
Thank you, Peggy. It's been a delight.
And I'm serious. I do want you to come back because we're going to have a whole show on star trails.
That would be fun. That would be a lot of fun.
Awesome. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. You have a good day.
Thank you. And to the audience, thank you for joining us. Remember, the show notes are at understandphotography.com. We have a lot going on this season, so click around a little bit. And if you're not on our mailing list, when you get to the website, understandphotography.com, click on freebies, put in your email address, choose what free thing you would like, and then you'll be on our mailing list. I'm Peggy Farron. Thank you for joining us for the Understand Photography Show. We will see you next Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.